A millionaire widow buys an old inn, finding a series of love letters hidden in a wall during renovations. The letters trace back to the town's judge, revealing a forbidden affair with a mysterious woman who disappeared. Linda Martin steered her old station wagon up the winding road that led to Somerset, her heart buoyed by a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. The early morning sun cast a warm, golden glow over the rolling hills, illuminating patches of fog that clung to the lower meadows like wisps of ghostly lace. Somerset, a small town cradled in the heart of New England, boasted landscapes that could steal one's breath away, yet it was the promise of a fresh start that quickened Linda's pulse. Having recently lost her husband, Linda found herself at a crossroads, seeking not just solace, but a new purpose. The Somerset Inn, a once charming establishment now in dire need of repair, had become her beacon of hope. She envisioned it not only as a business venture, but as a healing project, a place to mend the seams of her frayed spirit. As she drove through the town's quaint main street, Linda admired the well-preserved colonial buildings and the friendly waves of early risers. Somerset seemed untouched by time, a place where past and present seamlessly intertwined. Her destination, however, lay just on the outskirts, where the town's rustic charm gave way to the whispers of untamed wilderness. Pulling into the gravel driveway of the inn, Linda felt a surge of pride. The building stood as a testament to historical architecture, its wooden facade weathered but dignified, but it was the inn's potential whispered in the creak of the old sign swinging above the porch that truly captured her imagination. Here she would start anew, weaving her story into the fabric of this community. Stepping out of the car, Linda stretched her legs and took a deep breath, the crisp air filling her lungs with a revitalizing chill. She walked around the property, noting the overgrown garden that promised spring blooms and the serene backdrop of towering pines. This was her new home, her new challenge, and her new life. Inside, the inn held the musty scent of disuse, with sheets draped over furniture like ghosts of a bygone era. Linda wandered through the rooms, each step stirring up dust motes that danced in the slanting beams of morning light. She imagined the laughter and stories that had once filled these spaces, and it strengthened her resolve. This place wouldn't just be her refuge, it would be her redemption. The first week passed in a blur of activity. Linda, armed with a crowbar and a sense of determination, tackled the most pressing renovations. The inn's charm was buried under layers of neglect, peeling wallpaper, creaky floorboards, and decades of grime. Each room she restored brought a small victory, a step closer to realizing her dream. On a particularly sunny afternoon, Linda decided to address the parlor's west wall. The wallpaper, a faded floral print, peeled off in stubborn strips, revealing the bones of the building. As she scraped away years of outdated decor, her crowbar struck something hard behind the plaster. Curious, Linda chipped away at the area, her heart rate increasing with each flake of plaster that fell to the floor. Her efforts soon uncovered a small wooden compartment hidden within the wall. It was a deliberate hiding place, crafted with care, obscured from casual view. With trembling hands, Linda pried open the compartment. Inside, she found a stack of letters, their envelopes yellowed with age, tied together with a faded red ribbon. Linda's pulse quickened as she untied the ribbon and unfolded the top letter. The handwriting was elegant, flowing across the page with a confident flourish. The words spoke of love and longing, of stolen moments and secret meetings. Each sentence was a brushstroke in a larger portrait of forbidden romance. As she read, Linda felt as though she were intruding on something intensely private, yet the historian in her thrilled at the discovery. These letters were not just personal artifacts, they represented a slice of the town's hidden history, a story that had been deliberately concealed. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the room as Linda continued to read. Each letter pulled her deeper into the mystery. Who were these lovers? Why were their letters hidden? And most importantly, what had become of them? Her initial delight slowly morphed into a sense of responsibility. These letters held secrets that could alter the understanding of Somerset's past. They were more than just forgotten correspondence. They were potential keys to unlocking long-sealed truths. As dusk fell, Linda sat surrounded by the scattered letters, aware that her discovery was too significant to keep to herself. Yet, she hesitated, knowing that revealing these secrets could stir up more than just historical interest. It could awaken old wounds and challenge the idyllic peace of her new home. The following morning, with a strong cup of coffee in hand, Linda spread the letters out on the large oak table that dominated the dining room. The early light filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow over the papers that seemed to hold so many secrets. As she read through the letters again, her historian's mind began to piece together a narrative filled with passion, secrecy, and an undercurrent of despair. The letters were addressed to a dearest Eleanor and signed simply Ange. The content varied from expressions of deep affection to detailed plans for future rendezvous and, increasingly, to desperate pleas for understanding and forgiveness. The tone suggested a relationship under strain, one hindered by external pressures neither could control. Linda's curiosity deepened as she noted the dates and locations mentioned in the letters. They spanned several years in the late 1970s, a period of significant social change, yet the name Eleanor never surfaced in any local historical records she had previously encountered. This discrepancy suggested that Eleanor might have been an outsider, or perhaps her identity had been deliberately obscured. As she organized the letters chronologically, Linda's respect for their privacy waned under her growing need to understand the full story. Who was Jay? Could it be someone still living in Somerset? And what had been the outcome of this fraught relationship? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the front door. It was Thomas, the local handyman she had hired to help with the heavier aspects of the renovation. His timing was perfect, not just for the day's work, but also as a sounding board for her discovery. "Morning, Linda," Thomas greeted, as he stepped into the cool interior of the inn. "I brought the new window frames we talked about. Where do you want to start today?" Linda led him to the dining room, the letters still spread out on the table. "Actually, Thomas, there's something else I need your help with first," she said, gesturing towards the documents. Thomas peered down at the table, his brow furrowing slightly. "These look old. Something interesting." "They're love letters. I found them hidden in the wall," Linda explained, watching his reaction closely. She respected Thomas's deep knowledge of the town's history and his sense of discretion. Thomas picked up a letter, reading the first few lines before looking up at Linda. "These are pretty intense. Do you know who wrote them?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out. The letters are signed with a J. I was hoping you might have some insight, given your family's long history here." Thomas handed the letter back to her. "A lot of people could be J, but you're right, this could be important. Somerset has its share of skeletons in the closet." His casual acknowledgement of the town's hidden past sent a chill down Linda's spine. "I need to know more about these people and what happened to them. Can you help? I can ask around discreetly. A lot of the older folks know stories that never made it into the official histories," Thomas offered, a twinkle of intrigue in his eye. Linda nodded, relieved. "Thank you, Thomas. I'd appreciate that, and I'll keep digging on my end as well." As Thomas set off to work on the windows, Linda turned back to the letters. The mystery was too deep, the stakes too personal, to ignore. She knew she was uncovering something significant, something that could stir the quiet waters of Somerset. Outside, the sky had begun to cloud over, the wind picking up. Leaves whispered and windows rattled as if the town itself was responding to the stirrings within its old walls. Linda felt a surge of resolve. She was no longer just renovating an inn, she was peeling back layers of history, determined to bring the truth to light. Late that evening, as Linda prepared to lock up the inn for the night, she found a note slipped under the front door. The message was terse and chilling. "Stop digging into the past. Some stones are best left unturned." The handwriting was jagged, rushed, as if the writer was both angry and anxious. Linda's hands trembled slightly as she held the note, her earlier excitement about the letters now tempered by a real sense of danger. Despite the warning, or perhaps because of it, Linda felt her resolve harden. She had lived enough years to know that fear often meant you were on the verge of something important. After securing the doors and windows, she sat down at the dining room table, the letters spread out before her, and considered her next steps. It was clear that the letters touched on a sensitive part of the town's history, sensitive enough to provoke threats. The next morning, Linda shared the threatening note with Thomas, who frowned deeply as he read it. "This isn't good, Linda. Somerset is a friendly place, but it has its share of old grudges and secrets. Whoever wrote this might be more than just an idle threat. I need to be careful, but I also can't just ignore this," Linda replied, her voice steady. "The truth has a way of coming out, one way or another. I want to be ready when it does." Thomas nodded, agreeing to keep an eye out for anyone unusual lurking around the property. "I'll ask a few discreet questions, see if I can figure out who might have a stake in keeping things quiet." Linda spent the rest of the day bolstering security around the inn and continued her research into the letters. Her investigation was now twofold: uncover the story within the letters and protect herself from those who wished for it to remain hidden. Over the next few days, Linda made a point to visit the local library, poring over town archives and old newspapers for any mention of a scandal in the late 1970s that matched the timeline of the letters. The librarian, Mrs. Hopkins, a wiry woman with spectacles perpetually slipping down her nose, became an unwitting ally. Intrigued by Linda's project, she helped unearth a series of articles about a high-profile court case involving a prominent local figure, a case that had mysteriously gone cold. "Seems like this Jay might have been someone quite influential," Mrs. Hopkins commented, handing Linda a faded newspaper clipping. The article didn't specify names, but the dates and vague references to a disgraced judge seemed more than coincidental. Armed with new information, Linda arranged to meet with the town's oldest resident, Mrs. Abernathy, who had been a socialite during her heyday and knew everyone's secrets. The elderly woman welcomed Linda into her home, a Victorian mansion filled with photographs and antiques, each a testament to Somerset's storied past. As Linda explained her discovery and the subsequent threats, Mrs. Abernathy's sharp eyes gleamed with a mixture of nostalgia and sorrow. "Ah, yes, the judge. He was a complicated man involved with a woman not his wife. I remember the whispers, the looks. But then, one day, it all just stopped. No more talk, no more woman." Linda listened intently, absorbing every detail. Mrs. Abernathy's account provided a crucial piece of the puzzle, linking the judge directly to the mysterious Eleanor. But the question remained: what had happened to her? "Thank you, Mrs. Abernathy," Linda said as she prepared to leave. "You've been incredibly helpful." The elderly woman held Linda's hand, her grip surprisingly firm. "Be careful, my dear. This town loves its secrets, and not everyone wants them aired." Back at the inn, Linda felt a mix of exhilaration and fear. She was closer now to understanding the full story, but the shadows that moved just beyond the edge of light grew darker, more threatening. She knew she was stirring up echoes of the past that some wanted silenced forever. As dusk settled over Somerset, Linda reflected on her next move. The inn, with its creaking floors and whispering walls, no longer felt quite so welcoming. but rather like a stage set for a drama yet to unfold. The next day, armed with new information and bolstered by Mrs. Abernathy's insights, Linda decided it was time to confront Judge Harrow directly. She found him in his expansive garden, tending to his roses, a hobby he was famously passionate about, even among the townsfolk. "Judge Harrow," Linda began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "May I have a moment of your time?" The judge, an elderly man with a stern visage that softened slightly at the sight of a visitor, paused and wiped his hands on a cloth. "Of course, Mrs. Martin. What brings you to my garden this fine morning?" Linda took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "I recently found some letters while renovating the inn. They're quite old and seem to involve someone of considerable local importance from about 40 years ago." Judge Harrow's expression remained unreadable, but Linda noticed a slight tightening around his eyes. "Letters, you say? And how, may I ask, do they concern me?" "They're romantic in nature, addressed to someone named Eleanor. I believe they may shed some light on a part of Somerset's history that's been kept quiet," Linda replied, watching the judge closely. A long silence followed, during which the judge seemed to weigh his response. Finally, he sighed, a weary sound that carried a weight of unspoken stories. "Eleanor was a dear friend, a remarkable woman. Her disappearance was a tragedy that affected many, myself included. But that's ancient history, Mrs. Martin. Best left alone." Linda felt a chill at the mention of Eleanor's disappearance, something no one had spoken of directly to her before. "But don't you think the truth deserves to be known, for her sake, if not for the town's?" Judge Harrow looked at her, his gaze sharp and assessing. "You're playing with fire, Mrs. Martin. Some secrets are buried for a reason. Digging them up can only cause harm." Linda nodded respectfully, realizing she would not get more from the judge today. "Thank you for your time, Judge. I'll consider your advice." As she left, Linda felt a mixture of frustration and determination. The judge's reaction had only confirmed her suspicions that these letters were a key to understanding not just Eleanor's story, but also a hidden chapter of Somerset's history. Back at the inn, Linda spent the afternoon in the attic, rummaging through old boxes and records left by previous owners, hoping to find anything more about Eleanor. As the sunlight waned, she uncovered a dusty, bound journal, a diary belonging to the inn's owner at the time of Eleanor's disappearance. The diary entries provided a daily account of life in Somerset and occasionally mentioned Eleanor in passing, painting her as a vibrant presence in the town. Then, abruptly, the entries concerning her stopped. The last mention was a cryptic note: "Eleanor's gone, and the judge is beside himself. Poor man, poor town, caught in a storm with no end." This new discovery was both thrilling and chilling. With night falling, Linda sat in the dimly lit attic, piecing together the story from the fragments she had gathered. It was clear that whatever happened to Eleanor was a turning point for the judge, and perhaps for the whole town. A sense of urgency gripped Linda. She needed to understand the full scope of the affair and its repercussions. Her next step was clear. She would organize the information and present it to the local historical society. Maybe, with their resources, she could delve even deeper and perhaps bring some closure to this long-hidden mystery. As she prepared to close the diary, a sudden gust of wind swept through the attic, knocking over a small stack of books. The noise startled her in the quiet, shadowy space, a stark reminder of the note's warning. Linda realized she was no longer just renovating an inn or uncovering a love affair. She was stirring forces that had long lain dormant. The following day, Linda decided to share her findings with Evelyn, Judge Harrow's daughter, hoping to gauge her reaction and perhaps gain an ally. She invited Evelyn to the inn under the pretense of discussing some routine town council business. As they sat in the newly refurbished parlor, Linda cautiously brought out the diary and the letters. "Evelyn, I found something in the attic that might interest you," she began, her voice carefully neutral. Evelyn, a woman in her early 60s with her father's sharp eyes, looked at the displayed items with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. As her eyes scanned the diary entry mentioning Eleanor, her composure faltered. "Where did you get this?" Evelyn's voice was tense, her hands trembling slightly as they hovered over the diary. "I found it here, in the inn, along with the letters. They tell a story that I think is important for the town to remember and understand," Linda replied, watching Evelyn closely. Evelyn's eyes darted around the room as if looking for an escape, or maybe for eavesdroppers. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You don't know what you're stirring up, Linda. This isn't just about the past. It's about now. My father, he's not the man you think he is." Before Linda could respond, Evelyn stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I have to go. Please, Linda, consider what you're doing, for everyone's sake." As Evelyn hurried out, Linda felt more bewildered than ever. She knew she was close to something pivotal. Her resolve to find the truth solidified. She turned her attention back to the diary, flipping through it once more to make sure she hadn't missed anything. And then she saw it. A photograph had slipped from between the pages and fallen to the floor. It was an old, faded picture of Judge Harrow and a woman Linda assumed was Eleanor, looking happy and carefree. On the back, someone had written, "Eleanor, summer 1979, before the storm." This photograph was the proof Linda needed that the relationship was not only real, but deeply significant. It also placed Eleanor in the town right before her disappearance, a key piece of evidence that could unravel the entire mystery. As Linda stared at the photograph, the weight of her discovery pressing upon her, she realized the dangers of her pursuit. But now, there was no turning back. The photograph of Judge Harrow and Eleanor, frozen in a moment-long past, lay on Linda's desk as a stark reminder of the stakes involved. The image, coupled with the escalating warnings, solidified her resolve to seek the truth, no matter how complex or dangerous the path might become. The morning after Evelyn's abrupt departure, Linda found herself grappling with the implications of her discoveries. She decided to take additional precautions, installing new locks and a security system around the inn. Despite these measures, a persistent unease lingered, the kind that crept into her thoughts during the quiet moments of the day. Determined to keep pushing forward, Linda reached out to the local historical society, arranging a meeting to discuss her findings and seek their guidance. Perhaps, she hoped, they could offer support or further insight into the town's tightly held secrets. As she prepared for the meeting, her phone rang, a call from Thomas, who had been making his own inquiries. "Linda, I think you should be careful who you talk to about this," he warned. "Some folks are getting nervous, and I've heard whispers that not everyone wants the past dug up." His words were a cold splash of reality. Linda thanked him, her mind racing with the potential consequences of her investigation. She was stirring up more than just historical intrigue. She was potentially uncovering something that some people might go to great lengths to keep buried. Linda's concerns were confirmed later that day when she returned from her meeting with the Historical Society to find the inn had been vandalized. The front door was ajar, several windows were smashed, and inside, her office had been ransacked, papers strewn about, drawers pulled out, and her computer smashed. Standing amid the chaos, Linda felt a surge of anger and fear. The attackers hadn't left any message this time, but the intent was clear. It was a blatant attempt to intimidate her into abandoning her quest for the truth. After reporting the incident to the local police, who promised to investigate but seemed skeptical of any connection to her historical research, Linda began the cleanup process. She was shaken but undeterred. If anything, the vandalism reinforced her determination to uncover the story hidden within the letters and the photograph. Whoever was behind this wanted desperately to keep the past buried, which only convinced Linda that it was something significant, something potentially explosive. That evening, as she boarded up a broken window, Linda reflected on her next steps. It was obvious that she needed to be more strategic and cautious, but backing down was not an option. She would have to navigate the fine line between pursuit of the truth and her own safety. As she secured the last board, her resolve hardened. Somerset's serene facade belied the turbulent undercurrents she had unwittingly stirred. Linda knew that moving forward required not just courage, but a careful consideration of whom to trust. In the days following the vandalism, Linda's investigation took on a new intensity. The break-in had only fueled her determination, but it also made her realize she needed to be methodical in her approach. She began spending more time at the Somerset Library, poring over town records and historical documents, searching for any mention of Eleanor or clues that might tie her story to the present. Linda's persistent research soon led her to a series of court cases from the late 1970s. One case, in particular, caught her eye, a high-profile trial involving a local businessman accused of embezzlement. The case had been dismissed under mysterious circumstances, and Judge Harrow had been the presiding judge. The dates aligned with the timeline of the letters and Eleanor's disappearance. Intrigued, Linda dug deeper into the case, discovering that the businessman had close ties to influential figures in Somerset, including the judge himself. The more she read, the more she realized that this trial might have been the catalyst for the events that followed. Could it be that Eleanor knew something she wasn't supposed to? Was her relationship with Judge Harrow more than just a romantic entanglement? Could it have been tied to something far more dangerous? Linda's research painted a picture of a town where power and influence could manipulate the course of justice, and where those who knew too much could simply disappear. The implications were chilling, but they also provided a possible motive for why Eleanor had vanished so suddenly. This revelation made Linda more certain than ever that the letters were not just personal correspondences. They were pieces of evidence, fragments of a larger, more sinister puzzle that someone wanted to keep hidden at all costs. Armed with this new information, Linda knew she needed to speak to those who had been close to the case, or who had lived through that tumultuous time in Somerset. She sought out former associates of the businessman involved in the trial, as well as anyone who might remember Eleanor or her sudden disappearance. Her first stop was at the local nursing home, where she met with Mr. Richard Glover, a retired lawyer who had been practicing during the time of the trial. Richard was in his late 70s, sharp-witted, and still had a remarkable memory for detail. As they sat in the quiet common room, Linda shared what she had uncovered, watching as Richard's expression grew more guarded. "You've been doing your homework," he remarked, his tone both impressed and wary. "Mr. Glover, I believe there's more to this story than what the public was told," Linda said, leaning forward. "I think Eleanor might have been involved in something that made her a target." Richard sighed, his eyes drifting to the window as if he were looking back in time. Eleanor, she was a bright woman, full of life, but she got mixed up in things she didn't fully understand. There were powerful people involved, people who would do anything to protect their interests. Linda's heart raced as Richard continued. "The judge, he tried to protect her, I believe, but there was only so much he could do without endangering himself. The trial, it was a farce. Everyone knew it, but no one could do anything about it. And then Eleanor, well, one day she was just gone." "Gone," Linda echoed, her voice barely a whisper. "Do you think she was silenced?" Richard hesitated before nodding slowly. "That's my belief, but proving it, That's a whole different story. Those who could tell you the truth are either dead or have too much to lose by speaking up." Linda sat back, absorbing his words. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was darker and more dangerous than she had imagined. Yet, she couldn't stop now. Not when she was so close to uncovering the truth. As she left the nursing home, Linda felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. What she had uncovered could shake the foundations of Somerset, but she had to tread carefully. The stakes were higher than ever, and one wrong move could not only end her investigation but put her in serious danger. The conversation with Richard Glover weighed heavily on Linda as she returned to the inn. She now had a clearer picture of the forces at play during that fateful time in Somerset's history, but she also understood the risks involved in bringing these secrets to light. Still, the drive to uncover the truth and to honor the memory of Eleanor, who had been silenced, pushed her forward. Linda decided that the next step was to share her findings with the town, despite the potential fallout. She contacted the editor of the local newspaper, a middle-aged man named Jack Bailey, who had a reputation for being fair but cautious. When she laid out her story, Jack was visibly intrigued but also hesitant. "This is some heavy stuff, Linda," Jack said, leaning back in his chair, his fingers tapping rhythmically on his desk. "If what you're saying is true, it could blow the lid off a lot of things people have conveniently forgotten or chosen to ignore. But it could also cause a lot of trouble. Are you sure you want to go down this road?" Linda nodded, her expression resolute. "The truth needs to come out, Jack. People deserve to know what really happened. It's not just about the past. It's about the kind of town we want Somerset to be today." Jack studied her for a long moment before nodding slowly. "All right, I'll run the story. But be prepared. There's no telling how people will react. Some might be grateful, but others, well, they might not appreciate you dragging up old skeletons." That night, Linda could hardly sleep, her mind racing with the possible repercussions of her decision. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The truth was about to be exposed, and she could only hope that it would lead to justice rather than further harm. The morning the story broke, Linda was met with a mix of reactions. Some townsfolk approached her with quiet words of thanks or supportive nods, while others shot her wary glances or outright scowls. Somerset had always prided itself on its tranquility, and now Linda had stirred up a hornet's nest. At the local grocery store, she overheard snippets of conversation as she pushed her cart down the aisle. "Can you believe it? Digging up all that old dirt. What good does it do now?" One woman whispered to another. "Maybe it's about time someone did," her companion replied. "We've all known something wasn't right back then." The town was clearly divided. As she stepped up to the counter to pay, the cashier, a young woman with a tight-lipped expression, barely met Linda's eyes as she scanned the items. The tension was palpable, and Linda realized that her actions had placed her at the center of a storm, one that could either cleanse or destroy. Back at the inn, Linda found a letter in her mailbox. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the message was clear. "You've gone too far. Stop now, or you'll regret it." Linda's hands shook as she read the note. The threats were becoming more personal, more direct. But rather than deterring her, they only strengthened her resolve. Whoever was trying to silence her was scared of what she might uncover next. As the day wore on, Linda received visits from a few of the town's residents. Some came to offer support, sharing their own suspicions and stories of what they remembered from that time. Others, however, came to express their displeasure, accusing her of stirring up trouble and jeopardizing the town's peace. "I just want to see justice done," Linda replied calmly, though inside she felt the strain of the growing opposition. It's not just about the past, it's about the truth, and about making sure we don't make the same mistakes again. As the sun set, Linda sat alone in the quiet inn, reflecting on the events of the day. She knew she had made powerful enemies, but she also knew she had allies, people who believed in what she was doing and who wanted to see the truth come out as much as she did. The town was on edge, and Linda could feel the tension building like a coiled spring, ready to snap at any moment. She had set something in motion that couldn't be stopped, and the next few days would reveal just how deep the town's wounds truly ran. The day after the story was published, Linda received an unexpected phone call from Judge Harrow himself. His voice was calm, almost too calm, as he requested a meeting at his home. Despite the tension between them, Linda agreed, sensing that this could be the breakthrough she had been seeking. When she arrived at the judge's stately old house, she was struck by the quiet grandeur of the place. The judge led her into his study, a room lined with shelves of law books and framed photographs that spoke of a long and distinguished career. "Mrs. Martin," he began, settling into a leather chair opposite her. "You've certainly stirred things up in Somerset, but I suspect you already knew that would happen." Linda nodded, her gaze steady. "I did, but the truth needs to be told, Judge. People deserve to know what happened to Eleanor and why." The judge sighed, leaning back in his chair. For a long moment, he said nothing, his eyes distant as if he were lost in memories. Finally, he spoke, his voice heavy with regret. "Eleanor was a good woman, caught up in something much bigger than herself. We were close, yes, but our relationship was complicated by the pressures of that time. The trial you uncovered, it was only the tip of the iceberg." Linda leaned forward, heart pounding. "What do you mean? Was she involved in the case somehow?" "Not directly," he replied, his eyes darkening. "But she knew things that could have ruined powerful people in this town. When she tried to speak out, she was silenced. I tried to protect her, but I was only one man, and there were too many forces against us." The judge's admission sent a shiver down Linda's spine. "Are you saying she was murdered?" "I can't say for certain," he replied, his voice faltering. "But I've always believed that she didn't disappear by choice. Someone made sure she couldn't reveal what she knew. And in doing so, they buried more than just her. They buried the truth." Linda sat back, absorbing the enormity of what the judge had just revealed. The implications were staggering. Not only had Eleanor been silenced, but her death, or disappearance, had been covered up with the complicity of those in power. "Why are you telling me this now?" Linda asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because," the judge replied, his eyes meeting hers with a mixture of sorrow and determination, "I'm old, Mrs. Martin, and I've lived with this burden for too long. It's time the truth came out, whatever the consequences. I only hope that you're prepared for what you're about to uncover." As Linda left the judge's house, her mind raced with the possibilities. She was now more certain than ever that she was on the verge of something explosive. But with that certainty came a deep sense of foreboding. The truth was close, so close she could almost touch it, but at what cost? The judge's revelations had shaken Linda to her core, but they had also given her the final pieces of the puzzle she needed. She knew now that she was up against more than just old secrets. She was up against a conspiracy that had roots deep within Somerset's power structure. Determined to protect herself and her investigation, Linda decided to reach out to her most trusted allies. She invited Thomas and a few other key supporters to a private meeting at the inn, where she laid out everything she had learned, including the judge's confession. "This is bigger than I ever imagined," Linda said, her voice filled with urgency. "We're dealing with people who will stop at nothing to keep the truth buried, but we can't let them win. We need to work together, share information, and make sure that if anything happens to any of us, the truth still comes out." Thomas nodded, his expression grim. "We're with you, Linda, but we need to be careful. If they're willing to go this far to protect their secrets, they won't hesitate to come after us if they think we're a threat. The group spent hours strategizing, planning their next moves, and deciding who they could trust. They knew they were playing a dangerous game, but they were also determined to see it through to the end. However, not everyone in the group was as loyal as they appeared. Unbeknownst to Linda, one of her allies had been secretly feeding information to the very people they were trying to expose. That night, as the group dispersed, Linda received a call from Evelyn Harrow. "Linda, you need to stop this now," Evelyn said, her voice trembling with fear. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. They know everything. They've been watching you, listening to your meetings. You're in more danger than you realize." Linda's heart sank as the realization hit her. There was a mole in her group. Someone had betrayed them, and now everything was at risk. "Who is it, Evelyn? Who's been feeding them information?" she demanded. Evelyn hesitated, then whispered, "I can't tell you over the phone. Meet me tomorrow at the old church on the edge of town. We'll talk then." As the call ended, Linda felt a wave of dread wash over her. The stakes had just been raised even higher, and the line between friend and foe had blurred beyond recognition. The next day's meeting with Evelyn could be her only chance to save herself and to finally uncover the truth. The hours leading up to her meeting with Evelyn were some of the longest Linda had ever endured. She spent the night pacing the creaky floors of the inn, her mind racing with possibilities and fears. The revelation of a mole within her circle had shaken her deeply, and now every interaction, every word spoken during their meetings replayed in her mind, tainted by suspicion. As dawn broke, Linda found herself sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the photograph of Judge Harrow and Eleanor. The image had taken on new meaning in light of what she had learned. It was no longer just a piece of the past. It was a symbol of the lives and truths that had been destroyed to protect a few powerful individuals. Linda knew that meeting Evelyn at the old church was risky, but she also knew she had no choice. If Evelyn had information about the mole, it could be the key to both her safety and the success of her investigation. Yet, the thought of walking into a potential trap filled her with dread. Before leaving, Linda wrote a letter to Thomas, outlining everything she had discovered, including her suspicions about the mole. She left it on her desk, along with instructions to contact the authorities and the press if she didn't return by nightfall. It was a precaution she hoped wouldn't be necessary, but one she couldn't afford to ignore. With her heart heavy but her resolve firm, Linda drove to the old church on the outskirts of Somerset, a place that had long been abandoned, its once proud steeple now crumbling and overgrown with ivy. The air was thick with tension as she approached, every sound magnified in the stillness of the morning. Linda arrived at the church early, the eerie silence amplifying her anxiety. She parked her car behind a cluster of trees, out of sight, and walked toward the church's entrance, her footsteps echoing on the cracked pavement. The wooden door creaked as she pushed it open, revealing a dusty, dimly lit interior that smelled of decay and neglect. She scanned the room, her eyes adjusting to the gloom. Evelyn was already there, standing near the altar, her posture rigid, her face pale and drawn. Linda approached cautiously, every instinct on high alert. "Evelyn," Linda greeted, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "What is it you needed to tell me?" Evelyn glanced around nervously before meeting Linda's gaze. "They know, Linda. They know everything, and they've got people everywhere, people you wouldn't expect. You have to stop before it's too late." "Who's the mole, Evelyn?" Linda pressed, desperate for answers. "Who's been betraying us?" Evelyn hesitated, her hands trembling. It's someone close to you, someone who's been with you from the start." Before Evelyn could say more, the sound of footsteps echoed through the church, followed by the unmistakable click of a gun being cocked. Linda's blood ran cold as she turned to see a shadowy figure emerging from the darkness, a gun pointed directly at her. "Step away from her, Evelyn," the voice commanded, cold and menacing. Linda recognized the voice immediately. It was someone she had trusted, someone who had been part of her inner circle from the beginning. "Why?" Linda asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why would you do this?" The figure stepped into the light, revealing their identity, a betrayal that cut Linda to the core. "Because some things are better left buried," they replied, their expression devoid of remorse. "And you were getting too close." In a split second, Evelyn lunged at the figure, trying to knock the gun out of their hand. A shot rang out, reverberating through the empty church. Linda watched in horror as Evelyn collapsed to the ground, clutching her side, blood seeping through her fingers. "Evelyn!" Linda screamed, rushing to her side, but the figure grabbed her, dragging her away from the wounded woman. "You should have stayed out of this, Linda," the figure hissed, pushing her to the ground. "Now it's too late." As the darkness closed in around her, Linda knew she was in more danger than ever before. The truth was within her grasp, but so was the cold hand of death. And as she lay there, helpless and terrified, she realized that the battle for the soul of Somerset was far from over. Linda's mind raced as she lay on the cold stone floor of the church, the pain from the fall throbbing in her side. She struggled to process the scene unfolding before her. Evelyn, gravely wounded, and the person she had trusted, standing over her with a gun. The betrayal cut deep, sharper than any physical wound could. The figure looming above her stepped closer, their face now fully illuminated by the dim light filtering through the church's stained glass windows. It was Thomas, the very man who had been her ally from the beginning, the one she had leaned on for support and guidance. "Thomas!" Linda gasped, her voice filled with disbelief. "Why? Why are you doing this?" Thomas's expression was cold, his eyes devoid of the warmth she had once known. "I didn't want it to come to this, Linda, but you left me no choice. You were digging too deep, getting too close to things that should have stayed buried." Linda struggled to sit up, her eyes darting to Evelyn, who lay motionless a few feet away. "You could have just warned me off, told me to stop. Why the threats, the violence?" Thomas shook his head, his grip tightening on the gun. "You wouldn't have listened. You're too stubborn, too driven by your need to uncover the truth. And now, because of that, we're all in danger." "Who are you protecting?" Linda asked, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and anger. "Is it the judge? The businessman from the trial? Who is behind all of this?" Thomas's jaw clenched, and for a moment, Linda saw a flicker of regret in his eyes. "It's not just one person, Linda. It's a whole system, a network of people who have worked too hard to keep this town running smoothly, to let someone like you tear it all down." Before Linda could respond, Evelyn groaned, drawing their attention. "Please, Thomas," she whispered weakly, her voice strained. "Don't do this. There's still time to fix things, to make it right." But Thomas's expression hardened, the flicker of regret extinguished. "It's too late, Evelyn. It's too late for all of us." He raised the gun again, but before he could pull the trigger, the sound of sirens pierced the air, growing louder as they approached the church. Thomas's eyes widened in shock, and he hesitated, looking toward the entrance. In that moment of distraction, Linda mustered all her strength and lunged at him, knocking the gun from his hand. The weapon clattered to the floor, and Linda scrambled to grab it, her heart pounding in her chest. Thomas recovered quickly, but before he could reach her, the church doors burst open and the police stormed in, guns drawn. "Freeze!" one of the officers shouted, his weapon trained on Thomas. Thomas froze, his face a mask of resignation as he slowly raised his hands. Linda collapsed against the wall, clutching the gun to her chest as relief and exhaustion washed over her. The officers quickly secured the scene, placing Thomas in handcuffs and calling for an ambulance to tend to Evelyn. Linda watched in a daze as they led Thomas away, his head bowed in defeat. As the adrenaline began to fade, Linda realized the full weight of what had just happened. Thomas, the man she had trusted, had been the mole all along. And though the immediate danger had passed, the questions and the betrayal lingered, casting a long shadow over the town of Somerset. Linda sat by Evelyn's bedside in the hospital, her thoughts a whirlwind of emotions. Evelyn had been stabilized, but the doctors warned that she was not out of the woods yet. The wound was serious, and her recovery would be slow and painful. As she watched Evelyn's chest rise and fall with each labored breath, Linda couldn't shake the sense of guilt that gnawed at her. She had pushed too hard, too fast, and now Evelyn was paying the price. When Evelyn finally stirred, her eyes fluttering open, Linda leaned in closer. "Evelyn," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry. This is all my fault." Evelyn's gaze slowly focused on Linda, and she managed a weak smile. "No, Linda," she replied, her voice barely audible. "You did what you had to do. I knew the risks when I decided to help you." Tears welled up in Linda's eyes as she grasped Evelyn's hand. "But I should have been more careful. I should have realized that he—" Evelyn squeezed Linda's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Thomas was always good at hiding his true nature. I never suspected him either, not until it was too late. But what matters now is that you're safe, and the truth is finally coming out." Linda shook her head, the tears spilling over. "But at what cost, Evelyn? Look at what's happened to you, to this town. I never wanted anyone to get hurt." Evelyn's smile faded, and she sighed softly. "The truth is rarely painless, Linda, but it's necessary. Somerset has been living a lie for too long. You've done something important, something that needed to be done, even if it's caused pain." Linda wiped her eyes, taking a deep breath to steady herself. "What happens now, Evelyn? How do we move forward from this?" Evelyn's expression turned serious, her eyes reflecting the wisdom and weariness of someone who had seen too much. "We rebuild, Linda. We take what's been shattered and put it back together, piece by piece. It won't be easy and it won't happen overnight, but it's the only way to heal." Linda nodded, her resolve strengthening. "You're right. We'll rebuild, and I'll make sure that the full truth comes out, no matter what it takes." Evelyn smiled again, a small but genuine expression of hope. "I know you will, Linda, and this town will be better for it in the end." As Linda sat there, holding Evelyn's hand, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would be difficult, and the wounds that had been opened would take time to heal, but she was determined to see it through, to ensure that the truth, no matter how painful, would lead to a better future for Somerset. The battle for justice was far from over, but Linda knew she was no longer fighting it alone. Evelyn's courage and support had given her the strength she needed to continue, and together they would face whatever came next. In the days following the confrontation at the church, the town of Somerset was a mix of shock, relief, and tentative steps toward healing. The news of Thomas's betrayal and the truth about Eleanor's disappearance spread quickly, leaving the townspeople grappling with the realization that the peaceful facade of their community had been built on lies and secrets. Linda found herself at the center of this whirlwind, both as a target of scrutiny and a symbol of resilience. Many residents, particularly those who had been in the dark about the town's murky past, approached her with a mixture of gratitude and guilt. They were thankful that she had uncovered the truth, but they also felt the weight of their complicity, however unintentional, in maintaining the silence that had allowed these wrongs to persist. The Historical Society, once wary of Linda's investigation, now embraced the opportunity to set the record straight. Together with Linda, they organized a town hall meeting to discuss the findings and the implications for Somerset's future. It was a chance for the community to come together, to face the uncomfortable truths that had been unearthed. and to begin the process of collective healing. The town hall was packed with residents of all ages, the air thick with a mixture of anticipation and unease. Linda stood at the front of the room, flanked by members of the Historical Society and a few of the town's elders, including Judge Harrow, who had reluctantly agreed to speak about his involvement in the events of the past. As Linda addressed the crowd, she spoke not only of the facts she had uncovered, but also of the emotional toll the investigation had taken on her and others involved. She didn't shy away from acknowledging the pain and betrayal felt by the community, nor did she ignore the damage that had been done, but she also emphasized the importance of moving forward with honesty, transparency, and a commitment to never allowing such a cover-up to happen again. When Judge Harrow took the stage, the room fell silent. His voice, though frail, carried the weight of years of regret and sorrow. He admitted to his role in the events that had led to Eleanor's disappearance, speaking of the pressures and fears that had driven him to make choices he would regret for the rest of his life. His confession was met with a mixture of anger and sympathy from the audience, but it was a necessary step toward reconciliation. By the end of the meeting, there was a palpable sense of release in the room, a collective exhalation after years of holding in a painful truth. The town was still raw, still grappling with the shock of what had been revealed, but there was also a sense of hope. Somerset was beginning to heal, and Linda knew that the process, though long and difficult, had truly begun. The aftermath of the revelations brought a renewed sense of purpose to the town of Somerset. With the truth finally out in the open, the community rallied together to rebuild not just the physical structures of their town, but the trust and unity that had been fractured by decades of secrets. Linda's inn became a symbol of this renewal. The renovations that had started as a personal project to rebuild her life after loss now took on a deeper significance. The inn, once a repository of hidden truths, was being transformed into a place of openness and community, where the history of Somerset could be remembered and learned from, rather than buried and forgotten. Neighbors who had once been suspicious of Linda's intentions now came together to help with the renovations. They brought tools, paint, and their own labor, turning the restoration of the inn into a town-wide effort. Even those who had been wary of her investigation now recognized the importance of what she had done and were eager to contribute to the rebuilding process. One afternoon, as Linda was working on the garden, an overgrown plot she had been meaning to tackle for weeks, she was joined by Evelyn, who had been released from the hospital and was slowly regaining her strength. Though still weak, Evelyn's determination to be part of the town's healing process was clear. "Looks like you've got your hands full here," Evelyn remarked with a smile as she picked up a trowel and began helping Linda clear the weeds. "More than I realized," Linda replied, her own smile tinged with a mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction. "But it feels good to be doing something positive, something that's about building rather than uncovering." Evelyn nodded, her gaze sweeping over the inn and the workers busy with various tasks around the property. "This place has come a long way, thanks to you, and so has the town." Linda paused, wiping sweat from her brow. "It wasn't just me. It took all of us to get here, to face the truth and decide to move forward." The two women continued to work in comfortable silence, the sun casting long shadows as it dipped lower in the sky. The inn was beginning to take on its new shape, not just as a business, but as a community hub where people could gather, share stories, and continue the process of healing. As the day drew to a close, Linda looked around at the progress they had made. The inn was still a work in progress, just like the town, but there was a sense of accomplishment in every repaired window, every freshly painted wall. Somerset was changing, and though the scars of the past would never fully fade, they were becoming part of a larger story, one of resilience, unity, and hope. Linda felt a deep sense of peace as she and Evelyn finished up their work for the day. The journey had been long and fraught with danger, but standing here in the warm glow of the setting sun, she knew that it had all been worth it. The truth had set them free, and now, together, they could build something better. The grand reopening of the Somerset Inn was a momentous occasion for the town. The building, once a crumbling relic of the past, now stood proudly as a symbol of renewal and transparency. Linda had worked tirelessly to transform the inn into a place that not only offered comfort and hospitality, but also honored the town's complex history. The event drew a large crowd, including many of the town's elders, who had lived through the events that Linda had uncovered. As the sun began to set, casting a golden light over the newly painted walls, Linda prepared to address the gathering. She knew that this was not just a celebration of the inn's reopening, but also an opportunity to bring closure to the story that had haunted Somerset for decades. Standing on the steps of the inn, Linda looked out over the faces of the townspeople. Some were familiar, others less so, but all were here because they recognized the importance of this moment. She took a deep breath and began to speak. "Today, we celebrate more than just the reopening of this inn," Linda began, her voice clear and strong. "We celebrate the resilience of this community, the strength to face our past, and the commitment to build a better future. The truth that has been uncovered over these past months has been difficult, painful even, but it has also been necessary." As she spoke, Linda could see the emotions on the faces of those gathered: relief, sorrow, hope. She knew that her words were resonating because they spoke to the shared experience of the town, the collective journey from darkness into light. With the help of the Historical Society and the brave testimonies of many in this town, we have pieced together the final parts of Eleanor's story, Linda continued, her tone somber. Eleanor was silenced because she knew too much, because she threatened the power structures that existed at the time. But now, her voice has been heard. Linda gestured to a large plaque that had been installed near the entrance of the inn. It bore the names of those who had been affected by the events of the past, including Eleanor's. The plaque was a permanent reminder of the importance of truth and justice, a tribute to those who had suffered in silence. As we move forward, let us remember the lessons we've learned, Linda concluded, her voice filled with resolve. Let this inn be a place where we honor our history, embrace our present, and look toward a future built on honesty and integrity. The crowd erupted in applause, the sound echoing through the twilight air. As Linda stepped down from the steps, she was surrounded by townspeople offering their thanks and congratulations. Among them was Judge Harrow, who approached her with a solemn expression. "You've done something remarkable here, Linda," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Eleanor would be proud." Linda nodded, her eyes meeting his. "Thank you, Judge. I couldn't have done it without the support of this town." As the crowd began to disperse, Linda felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had led to this moment, a moment of healing and closure, not just for her, but for the entire community. In the weeks that followed the reopening of the Somerset Inn, the town continued to heal. The inn quickly became a hub of activity, hosting community events, historical talks, and gatherings that brought the townspeople closer together. Linda's efforts to restore the inn had not only revived the building, but had also breathed new life into Somerset itself. The plaque outside the inn became a place of reflection for many. Townspeople often paused to read the names, to remember those who had been affected by the events that had once been hidden in shadows. The story of Eleanor, once buried and nearly forgotten, was now a part of the town's collective memory, a reminder of the importance of truth, even when it is difficult to face. Linda's own life had changed in profound ways. She had arrived in Somerset seeking a fresh start, a place to rebuild after her own personal losses. What she had found was a community that had embraced her, supported her, and ultimately been transformed by her determination to uncover the truth. As she walked through the bustling inn, greeting guests and overseeing the final touches on some renovations, Linda reflected on how far she had come. The inn, now a thriving business and a cornerstone of the community, was a testament to what could be achieved when people came together with a shared purpose. One afternoon, as she was arranging fresh flowers in the lobby, Evelyn stopped by, looking healthier and more vibrant than she had in months. The two women shared a smile as Evelyn admired the bouquet. "This place has become something special," Evelyn said, her voice filled with warmth. "You've done more than just restore a building, Linda. You've given this town a chance to start over." Linda nodded, feeling a sense of pride and contentment. "It was a team effort, Evelyn. I couldn't have done it without you and everyone else who believed in what we were doing." Evelyn reached out and squeezed Linda's hand. "Well, I'm glad you didn't give up. Somerset is better for it, and so are we." As Evelyn left, Linda took a moment to step outside and breathe in the crisp air. The town was quiet, peaceful, and filled with the promise of new beginnings. She looked at the plaque by the entrance, her heart swelling with a sense of legacy, one that she had helped to build, not just for herself, but for the entire community. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm, golden glow over the inn and the surrounding landscape. Linda knew that the work they had started here would continue long after she was gone, carried on by the people of Somerset who had found the courage to face their past and the strength to build a better future. As she turned to go back inside, Linda felt a deep sense of peace. The inn, the town, and the people had all found their place in the story of Somerset, a story of resilience, truth, and the enduring power of community. The journey had been challenging, filled with unexpected twists and turns, but in the end, it had led to a place of healing and hope. And that, Linda knew, was the greatest legacy of all. If you enjoyed, please consider subscribing to our channel and supporting us through the thanks button.